Over onderzoeksjournalisten in de vuurlinie. Met onderzoeksjournalist Cecil Mbuyisa, Eswatini, Swaziland. Een Tegenlicht Meet Up, naar aanleiding van de aflevering You Can't Kill the Story over het gevaarlijke werk van internationale onderzoeksjournalisten. We bekijken de documentaire samen met de Haarlemse shelter City-gast Cecil Mbuyisa, die daarna met Jan Hoekema in gesprek gaat over zijn werk als onderzoeksjournalist in Eswatini, Swaziland. Moderator is Jan Hoekema.
We watched an interesting documentary, although it was mostly on the European situation and more specifically on Azerbaijan, which is quite a bad country. I'm connected to Armenia, but that's an aside. But what is maybe interesting for us to know from you is that this approach of collaborative, I have to be careful, journalism, is that an approach which would appeal to you?
Good evening, everyone. I am very happy to be in the warmth of your presence this evening.
Good.
Collaborative journalism.
Collaborative journalism.
Because I watched the documentary last night,
Yeah,
in preparation, and began to think about some of the themes that they discussed. And I'm from Eswatini, where freedom of expression is very limited, really threatened.
In your country?
In my country, whatever exists of it.
Yeah. Sorry? Oh, okay. We have continue, please.
Okay, yeah. Doing journalism or doing human rights work in general is a risk, a big risk. And if someone, for example, I'm a freelance journalist, I work alone. I do not have the backing of an institution, for example. That means you're isolated. But if the process, of writing the story, this dangerous story, was democratized, if you had a team around you at the local level, maybe even at a regional level, for example, you have an editor in South Africa, for example, in Botswana, a group of editors supporting the process and know every detail. As you discover things, you have discussions, and it becomes a collaborative process.
Okay. Can you describe a little bit, Cecil, how the situation is in Eswatini? Because we don't hear much about your country. We know that it was Swaziland until 2018. There's a lot of conflict and oppression going on in the entire world. You are a small country, smaller than the Netherlands. How bad is the situation in your country, and how can we promote that we get to know more about your country?
Yeah. Eswatini is a very small country in Southern Africa. It was colonized by the British, but has been free since 1968. There was a constitution until 1973. The king, then Sobhuza II, decided to ban the constitution and rule by decree. That went on until 1978, and a kind of elections was introduced, but individuals were elected from constituencies. They could not be members of political parties. That continued until the king died in 1982, and then there was a vacuum for some years, and then in 1986 the current king was crowned. And then in South Africa there was democracy. In Mozambique they won their democracy, and the atmosphere in the region was a democratic one. So there were freedoms in the early days of his reign. But with time, citizens wanted more. More democracy, then he became more and more repressive and still ruling by decree, the decree instituted in 1973. But in 2005, a new constitution was passed. It was supposed to introduce democracy to the country, make this institution a democratic one. But it only made the institution of the monarchy stronger, extremely stronger. There are sections there that, the king, for example, is immune from prosecution, doesn't pay any taxes, and cannot even go on the stand as a witness. So he's above, but not just him and his family. And they have all the power and own most of the property.
But Cecil, I saw some articles and some clips on what is going on in your country, like random violence by police against peaceful protesters, about environmental damage because of the asbestos mines. So things are not improving.
No. Yeah, in fact, things are... in 2021, for example, there was a political unrest. I wonder what the causes were. The COVID-19 played a role, in terms of inspiring the anger, but there was an eruption in 2021 sparked by the death of a student and at the hands of the police. So people demanded accountability. When it didn't come, it became political. The argument then became, maybe if it were possible for us to vote for a prime minister, for example, instead of one being appointed by the king, maybe there could be some kind of accountability. And it spread, and the police suppressed that violently. It was the soldiers and the police and members of the correctional services. They are an armed force in Eswatini.
But we don't see much in the world, maybe because there are so many conflicts, the Ukraine, the Middle East, Gaza, what have you. Is your agenda also to promote to the world that the situation in Eswatini is giving concern?
Yeah, and maybe collaborative journalism can play a role.
Okay.
We are in the global south. We don't really have much power, and we don't really have resources. It's difficult to stay on a story, but also if the stories are going to have an impact, it might help, to learn best practices from journalists in the West, for example, and to work closely on certain stories, until this culture of democratic collaboration is instilled.
And what is your agenda when you go back in a few weeks? You go back first to South Africa, but then you will go back to Eswatini. Do you expect to be able to really influence public opinion and things in your country by writing critical articles, maybe in cooperation with other journalists as in this collaborative journalism?
Yeah, actually this year we were working on mining that's happening within a nature reserve. And that was collaborative. I worked with Dane Armstrong, an Eswatini citizen, older than me, but he's been an environmentalist all his life, new to journalism. And the work that we produced, citizens were able to read and to understand, because even in a dictatorship, life is still managed, by legislation, aspects of life. And if something goes wrong, you can always find legal recourse. But many people do not know that. And if you work really hard as a journalist and you do your research well and highlight the things that the polity can do or citizens can do, to fight for more democracy, maybe for a better voice in decision making, then journalism has that power. Yeah.
And so what can we do from the Netherlands and from Western Europe to assist you? I mean, we have Peace Justice in The Hague, we have the Shelter City project. Is there anything more that we can do from here to assist you in trying to promote more freedom of expression in your country?
Definitely plenty.
That's maybe quite ambitious, but
Just to be diplomatic, I'll say number one, capacity building. Number two, money.
Of course, we have your request for funding. That's very good.
Yeah. Help with resources.
Yeah.
Because journalism, if you do it well, is expensive, traditional media, because of the internet, is fading away. It no longer is profitable. In the 90s, for example, in Eswatini, you had this independent media, and they could fund themselves with advertisements, and the journalism was really robust. But now the advertising revenue is low, and to do really good journalism, it has to be done, by money. That comes from philanthropy, people who understand that this work is important, even for democracy, or people who just care about human beings, and then support, independent institutions. Always better to support institutions than individuals, unless the individual wants to go to school.
Yeah, that's good. By the way, if there's any question from the public, please raise your finger. Then Arno will join you with a microphone. I see a question here, Arno. Arno has the mic, the walking mic.
I've been to Eswatini one day. So I know it's a very traditional country.
Yeah.
And I have a question about journalists in South Africa. Do they concern about Eswatini?
South Africa has been tricky, because they are desperate to not be seen as meddling, because of the nature of Eswatini within South African borders, but sovereign. They do not want to be seen as interfering with the country's sovereignty. But the oldest political party in Eswatini, it was not the oldest, but the most prominent one, formed in 1983, Pudemo, has a very good relationship with the ruling party in South Africa. But that's just about the end of it. South Africa has never really exerted any pressure, not even within the Southern African development community.
Okay, I saw another question, or maybe a second question from you, and then
because Eswatini is not very big, there are very many conflicts, and it's very, very important for in the Southern Africa that more countries are connecting and do something, because then you get a voice.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
You agree, Cecil?
And a lot of my journalism over the years has been supported by South African institutions. From 2020 until 2022, I worked for a South African institution, but I covered Eswatini issues. So a lot of the support comes from South Africa, but at an official level, at a political level, it is absent.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are any other questions, please raise your finger. There's one finger next to the previous finger.
You said that the king owned nearby all the country. Did I understand well that he owned the ground, or that he was?
Oh, yeah. The land tenure system is complicated. From 1903, well, before the Anglo-Boer War, 1899 until 1903, there were a lot of concessions. Many people coming from Europe and coming from South Africa were given pieces of land on concession to farm, to mine. But in 1968, when we got our independence, many of these concessions became titled land, so that's private land. But there are vast amounts of land that were never concessions and that were never privatized. And we call that Swazi Nation land, now Eswatini Nation land. Those pieces of land are administered by chiefs, but on behalf of the king. So the king is a custodian.
Okay,
So
thank you for
explaining. If you write about it, it's immediately you write against the king.
Yes.
Oh,
Against the
well done.
king. Okay, well, that's interesting. Can I ask you, Cecil, are you alone in your critical journalism role in Eswatini, or how many colleagues, journalists, researchers are there in your country, and how can they express their opinions? What are the avenues to voice your critical products?
Oh, yeah, that's an important question. Thank you. In Eswatini, there are veteran journalists, investigative journalists, even this Begi Makubu, who I really, really respect. He was jailed in 2014, for almost 2 years because he wrote an article critical of the judiciary. He called into question its independence, and then he was jailed for it. He's still there. He runs a magazine called The Nation magazine, but it doesn't make enough money to absorb me. So, even though we like each other's work, and you have to sort of stand alone and try to, and then there's another organization called Een Tegenlicht is a Siswati word. The English equivalent is spark. I don't know the Dutch, They also do investigations. Vuisile is his name, Vuisile Hlachwayo. Brilliant journalism, but no resources.
And what countries exert the most influence in Eswatini? I mean, China is now coming up, and Taiwan is on the way back. I read in some stories. Which countries do influence Eswatini?
There's a lot of investment from Britain, since before 1968. There's the timber industry. A lot of it British capital. And then there is sugar plantations in the Lowveld. But that's a long time ago and very critical for the economy and good labor practices and really a lot of improvements. But in recent years, especially since 2011, a new law was passed and it greenlit extraction. There's a lot of mining happening, and the investments are coming from Asia. And it's just been horrible in general, the labor practices, but also the disregard for the environment.
Yeah. And is your concern mostly about the lack of political freedom, the lack of free press, or are you also at an even level concerned about environmental damage? Are these two things the biggest issue according to you?
I think the core issue is democracy.
Democracy, yeah. Okay.
You want people to, it's okay for investors, to invest and for governments to institute programs and stuff. And this is what has inspired me about Europe. That there are, especially the Netherlands, no matter where the political winds go, there are institutions to hold power to account. Citizens can still participate in a very meaningful way to bring about balance, a balance of power, And when I write these stories, is to empower people to recognize that, that you can build institutions.
Yeah. But would you say that there is some measure of democracy in Eswatini, but not a complete, mature democracy?
Yeah, but democracy is something you have to fight for, but Europe, because, these states remain sovereign. But the fact of the matter is that other countries are there, and especially with what's happening now, interest coming from everywhere else, it will be better for institutions here in Europe to support, democratic structures. To recognize institutions that are fighting towards democracy and to support them meaningfully.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have these lists, Cecil, by UNDP and the United Nations, which lists countries from 1 to 200, one with the most political freedom and freedom of expression, etc., and 200 maybe North Korea. Where would you list your own country on that list between number 1 and number 200?
In terms of
political freedom, democracy, freedom of expression, quality of the state institutions.
It's difficult to say because the king has all of the power.
Yeah, it's the king.
All of it. But it's a sophisticated system of power, formed over many, many years ago. And even the English recognized that and collaborated with them, because the political sway they have is really deep. And there's a sense of pride in being from Eswatini and having that kingdom, even though it can be, even though on the whole it's terrible,
Yeah. You're one of the few monarchies in Africa with Lesotho.
Yeah.
How long would you say the monarchy will be there in your country? Difficult question.
It's very difficult. I must be careful of my answer.
Yeah, you have to be careful.
I wonder. I think it's on very solid ground to even survive the current king's demise. It's on very solid ground. But it ought to be democratized, at least, as a symbol of unity, of culture. It has that value, but it is there's no democracy at all.
No, but would you expect maybe at some point in time a more enlightened, progressive new king which could stimulate and promote change in your country, like the Spanish king has done for some decades ago after the dictatorship of Franco?
That is something that will likely be won by ground-root organizations.
Okay.
It's democracy is something you have to intelligently fight for.
Okay.
And to mobilize support and to form groups, to read and, to prepare. And then, because power responds to pressure, So I am positive that we will get there. But I think that the monarchy will still be, on top at a, only at a ceremonial level, as a symbol, not with all of the power.
Well, we have a monarchy in the Netherlands which has also a symbolic power and not much more power, although we can debate about it. And will your role be and your ambition to strengthen the grassroots movement in your country as a journalist?
I hope, because, many journalists are vain, I'm not an exception to the rule. You do want the journalism to have some impact. You hope that if they read this article, sometimes just the indignation alone, not the information, the anger, the moral anger, the tone of the article, the way you go into detail, you want that to rouse people into action. It's a big part of it. But also and also if you provide, you do the research, you provide enough information, and people can use that to mobilize.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe a last question before we finish at 9:30. And don't be too polite. You're now here since mid-September in the Netherlands, in Haarlem. You go to The Hague. You have been in Breda and other places. How do you like the Netherlands, except for the terrible November weather and so on? Do you like it here? Do you have an impression? It's your first trip to Europe. You've been to the United States and New York. It's your first time to Europe. Can you share some brief observations about your experiences here?
It's been a wonderful time.
Wonderful time.
It's been formative. I've been everywhere. with the committee here in Harlem, always around me. Always, thank you. And the one thing that has really, really impressed me about Harlem especially is the rootedness, and about the Netherlands. People working extremely hard, but not geniuses or, of course there's a lot of intelligence involved, but it's a collective intelligence. It's teams upon teams upon teams of people digging the canals, dredging soil from the sea and making that productive. Yeah. It's a lot of work, but people coming together to do that work, and institutions, and even rights, gay rights. One of the first countries to make that official, but that is because people had to fight collectively to achieve that. So you go around the Netherlands, you get that sense, and also the preservation of memory. I've been to the museum, Frans Hals museum. I saw some paintings from the 17th century, I think. From Heemskerk, from around here, and went to the Anne Frank Museum in Amsterdam. Great. The preservation of memory and journalism does a bit of that.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you for your reflections, the mirror you hold for us. Thank you for your wise observations about the Netherlands, about Haarlem. And I would propose to look again at the leaflet and help you crowdfunding. You were originally thinking about studying law, but now you changed to video.
The important thing is to become the best professional I can be. I went to university to study law, didn't get to finish because no money. And then I found myself in journalism, and I've fallen in love with just telling stories. It's difficult stories, but they have to be told. So if I can really do it well at a professional level, the form doesn't matter. It can be print, it can be video, but with video you reach more people.
Well, let's all look again at the leaflet for crowdfunding for your further studies, and we wish you all the luck in the world. A good last 2 or 3 weeks before you go back at Christmas. First to South Africa, and then to Eswatini for your own country. And we hope that you have a good recollection of these few months in our small country and in our nice city, Haarlem. Thank you very much. A warm round of applause for Cecil. And now the bar is open.